Hello, everybody. This is episode 3 of the Intrusive Thoughts Show. I know I did one pretty recently. I don't know how regularly I'm going to be doing this series of what I'm going to cover. Most likely going to stay week to week, typically maybe twice a week at most. But anyway, today, the reason I'm doing this was simply because I watched the Tucker Carlson and Putin kind of interview. I'm trying to remember what I wrote. I wrote down some highlights from it. Here we go. Okay. So I watched. It was a two. First of all, this is a 2 hour interview. Very long. Just two guys talking. Tucker Carlson, Mr. Vladimir Putin, who we are currently in a war with. Over the territories with Ukraine. And kind of there. I mean, there's kind of been a conflict going on there, honestly, since 2014 with Russian-backed separatists in the Crimea region, and Russia having involvement there. But kind of ultimately, there was some peace agreements signed, but those have since been kind of rescinded, kind of didn't go anywhere, which kind of led some breadcrumbs to this kind of current conflict, along with NATO expansion. Was being, I believe, it was being discussed. And Putin, had his troops on the border, which I still feel at that time when his troops were on the border of Ukraine that we could have stopped that 1,000%. We could have talked him out of it. Um, but I'm not gonna excuse him for stuff at all. Let me be very clear. He's got a lot to answer for with, literally having no opposition party. Alexei Navalny, one of the, I think I'm saying, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he's one of the opposition leaders who was found poisoned. I don't know, I don't know how that happened. I'm not saying he did it. Maybe he did. Possibly the CIA. It would not surprise me at all. So a couple things. And, despite Putin's misgivings and strong arm kind of policies, there was numerous attempts by Putin, kind of in the post Cold War era, kind of after the Yeltsin kind of era ended, because there was corruption kind of during that time, things like that. There's still obviously some corruption with the oligarchs there, but generally speaking, in terms of the USA, their internal affairs are their business. But in terms of the USA and Russia, Russia made a lot of efforts to cooperate with us. I would say, one thing that we really reneged on, of course, was NATO expansion. We went eastward with that. I think Putin talked about how it was kind of done in three different phases with like the Baltics, Balkans, and things like that. And I know recently, I think it was Norway or there was some other, or no, Finland? I think it was Finland. Let me Google it. Finland. This is why I just do it in this format, so I can just Google stuff right here. Who is the latest to join NATO? Let me see. Okay, yeah, it was Finland. Okay, I had a feeling. Um, Sweden and Finland. Oh, Sweden's still talking about it. It looks like. So there's still more expansion going on. Um, that's a big thing. Oh, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm gonna save that. So, like I said, I feel like there was some decent efforts by the Russian people to kind of keep us out of it, kind of keep tensions down. I know he actually talked, okay, what was a very interesting, and again, I don't know the veracity of this claim. Let me be very clear with that. I don't need to be getting demonetized or I'm not making money on here, but, Putin did say he actually asked Bill Clinton, then president, if he could join NATO. And Clinton actually was receptive initially, but either after talking to some people, whatever, they kind of fell apart on that. But Putin's like, fine, whatever. And then I know they were also talking about a missile defense system. I know because they were talking about like issues with Iran, and wanting to work together, kind of on building that kind of type of thing. I think missile defense system is something we need. I think is going to be a big investment. Probably, I think one of the best investments we can make. I mean, that'll end a lot of the use of nuclear weapons. I feel like Not completely, but I think it's a deterrent because it stops missiles, intercontinental missiles. I know Donald Trump has recently talked about wanting to replicate the Iron Dome in Israel, which has a lot of basically it's a missile defense system that we're paying billions of dollars for. And it's like why can't we have that here? I feel like it would, it would be a worthwhile investment. That type of missile system, I think it was Project Star Wars they called it. In the 80s, Reagan wanted something, but we didn't have really the technology at the time, obviously, to implement it. The budget, those type of things. But obviously, in the age of rapid technological advancement, we kind of have those capabilities now. And we definitely need to be upgrading them because also during that interview, Putin's like, we developed hypersonic missiles that can get through some of those defenses. Which was basically telling us mess around and find out, basically. Yeah. But I digress. Anyway, one thing I really found interesting was Putin. Russia has more religious diversity than I previously thought. I didn't know they were. I think it was like 20% of the population was Muslim. I know, obviously, Eastern Orthodox. I kind of knew Eastern Orthodox was a big part, but I didn't know that there was still like a lot of like Muslims. I think they ceased mentioned there was some Buddhism. I know probably on the border of China, probably some of those areas. I guess there was just more of a religious diversity, and also Putin's comments about world religion, actually saying he respects world religion, really fascinated me. Just because he always, to me, at least I always got the impression he was someone who wanted a more homogenous culture. And in some respects, he wants that still, but I think he wants it more on a national, like, basis, not so much on religious basis. He respects the Eastern Orthodox Church, and I believe he is Christian. Identifies as Christian. I don't know to what extent, but generally speaking, I think generally, he's was surprisingly open on that. That kind of shook me a little. Didn't shook me like trauma. Like it just shocked me. It was something. It's just something I didn't hear him talk about. It was just it's something you wouldn't hear from the media, honestly. Um, Boris Johnson, number three. Boris Johnson sabotaged peace efforts. Um, and I believe I can even let's Google this because I am interested. Yeah, Ukraine peace talks. Let's go. Putin repeats nonsense claim. Okay, let's go to responsiblestatecraft.org. Okay, yeah, here's the European conservative over sabotage Ukraine. I'm trying to find something. I want to find something that would be UK Prime says Ukraine peace talks are doomed. This is from Reuters in April. Oh, that was kind of after. He's talking about it before. Um, I want to find something that was older and actually from a mainstream source because I'm actually very interested. Some people are saying, "Oh, it's a non." Did he? I'm real. It is a claim I want to. Obviously a Kiev Post. It's Ukrainian media. Immediately gotta be skeptical of that. Here, let's Google the Minsk agreements. Okay, so there was two parts of the Minsk agreements. This was during kind of the eastern regions, which is interesting, kind of where the war is kind of at right now. So the trilateral contact group in Ukraine, yada yada. In Minsk, it was signed by representatives. Where does it talk? Okay, the agreement failed to stop fighting. So then they did another one. More releases of prisoners of war, constitutional reforms. Okay, so it does say Russia themselves actually declared the Minsk Accords no longer existed, and that Ukraine, not Russia, was to blame for their collapse. So I would have to see more information here. The Second Battle of Don broke out. said that the forces would retake the. Okay. By January, the Minsk Protocol had completely collapsed. Following the Russian victory in defiance of the protocol, DPR, yada yada, will not be considered in the form it was adopted. Um, okay, following the talks, it was announced parties to the had agreed to a new package of peacemaking measures. Some of them were okay. So what is okay? So it called for immediate ceasefire in these regions, pull out of heavy weapons. Um, let's see, for Ukrainian shirts from districts oblast of Ukraine. Okay, the pullout of the above mentioned effective monitoring on the first day after a pullout. So these people signed it. And he was the president at the time, right? Former. Okay, he was the separatist leader. He was okay. One of them. Um. Well, okay, here it goes. Former President Kuchma. He was the former president of Ukraine, and he was like the rest of representative. The Ukrainian Russian representative, Mr. Zurabov, for being highly complicated and extremely and for being very similar. Okay, so they talked about tripwires. You know, it not. Okay, U.S. Department on January that the Red had actually deployed around to assist the separatists enforcing prior to the start of the ceasefire. Okay. Now this is interesting. If you really read the fine print, I know I kind of reading a lot. On December 27, 2018, Ukrainian news agency reported that not a single provision of the Minsk deal had been implemented. In July 2020, the officer announced Kuchma will no longer take part in the work. So Lush met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Okay, so they did. Okay, so Joe Biden and Putin in 2021, a whole year before the war, agreed to pursue diplomacy. A Normandy format was planned between yada yada yada. Ukraine fulfilled Russia's condition for a meeting in Paris and decided to withdraw on the integration of the Crimea and Donbass region because the law was contrary to Minsk II. This should be a big concern because they might go back on that, getting these regions in Crimea back in there. Um, and okay, so outstanding issues and it was to establish pro-Russian governments that, upon reincorporation into Ukraine, would facilitate Russian interference in Ukrainian politics. As their implementation would accomplish these goals. Okay, propose it's time that it was run its course. So they've kind of said that Minsk has run its course. It sounded like that. Claiming the role insisted that Ukraine negotiate directly with the of the Supreme. Okay. This right here is a problem right here. No intention of talking to terrorists. So that hardline stance on these Russian separatists, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky basically stopped them, it sounds like, to me. So like I said, by early 2021, it looks like the agreement they were looking into, kind of continuing some of it. Because I know typically with some of those agreements, it takes a couple years, to fully implement it, those type of things. But it looks like, yeah, by 2021, it was pretty much kind of starting to die down, and then by 2022, invasion. So it looks like there was a failure on, I would say, both parties in this. Maybe there was things that he could have done better. So let me get my notes pulled up here. Okay. Another interesting thing from this I'm sorry, I've ranted a long time. Parts of the countries like Hungary were actually there's parts of Hungary and did they say Austria? I think during that interview, I'd have to double check. Or no, Hungary and Romania, I think. There was small parts of those two countries that were actually implemented into Ukraine after World War II. As we kind of know, when Europeans draw borders to countries, they don't always do them perfectly. So Putin talked about how there was like a lot of people in like the very western portion of Ukraine. I don't remember what the city was called, but they were dressed in Ukraine, what they would typically be considered Hungarian, like I think they said like the tall hats or whatever. He's like, I thought there was performers or entertainers there or something. So definitely, and he said there was a lot of signs in, in Hungarian and Ukrainian, kind of, or Russian at the time, actually. He said, excuse me, were in that kind of area, so that there was some cultural differences. There were more Hungarian, and Tucker, I know, asked him, if Orban was interested in that territory. It doesn't sound like Orban is, though. I just thought that was kind of an interesting anecdote. Let's see. Yeah, so yeah, Russia asked to join NATO in like the 90s during the Clinton. I think he might have asked during the Bush. There was a lot, okay? Another thing that surprised me, there's memes on the internet about it. Putin, for the first entire hour of that interview, went on a tangent, 900-year tangent of Russian history. Our leaders cannot even come close. Like, people get mad when Trump's like, Putin's smart. He is smart. I can't recite that. I don't even know what I had for breakfast today. Like, well, I do, but you get the gist. Like, Joe Biden doesn't even know where he is. And that's we're gonna get to that in a minute about his mental fitness for office, because when you see the contrast of our current president and this guy Vladimir Putin, it just scared the crap out of you. This guy is like first of all, he's a former KGB agent, so he's already got the training on stuff, and is just generally a smart leader. So we're getting smoked. Another interesting thing that I was they talked about was U.S. sanctions on Russia. We froze their assets, and their ability from SWIFT, which I think is something financial. Like, it's the electronic financial transactions, how they're done. It's the system that like the entire world uses basically. They were excluded from that. And basically, we kind of shot ourselves in the foot because we shut down our own gas from getting that we were getting from Russia. Poland did specifically in Europe. They did that as one of the sanctions. Oh, we'll stick it to Putin. We'll stick it to him. So far, you've only been sticking it to your own people, and they're paying the premium for it. We've had to pay a premium for it with our gas for a little bit. Because you know, we theoretically could have been providing Europe with gas and oil and all that stuff for decades. But this administration wants to go all green agenda on us. Trump even warned Angela Merkel, get this, warned Angela Merkel about doing, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, because he's had the foresight to see that that would give Putin leverage, and that's exactly what happened. That's probably one of the biggest reasons he even went through with this, is because he knew he had some type of leverage over us. If he did not have that pipeline, I don't know if he would have went through with the invasion, because the economic effect, there's always an economic consequence of any type of conflict, those type of things. And another thing that he cited was that 34% of transactions in the past couple of years, I think last year he said, were done in yen and rubles. So with the Chinese, $240 billion traded with the Chinese. They said their goal was like 200 billion or something. He was talking about it with Tucker. So they've already shattered their goal. If it's probably going at if it's going at the rate I think it will, it'll definitely be over 300 billion. If it continues at the same rate it's going, close to a trillion by the end of the decade, probably. Honestly, that's an even bigger problem. Is we're bringing China and Russia like this with this war, and we're supposed to be strengthening NATO, which we're trying to like strengthen NATO by going into this war for a non-NATO country, and we got two members, we got Finland to join and stuff like that. And maybe Putin shouldn't have invaded. So obviously, after the war, Ukraine might be joining NATO. But I think we would have to ask a bigger question. NATO was invented to counter the Soviets at the time. the Soviets who had the Warsaw Pact, which I believe was with them and all their other countries, things like that. Communist leaning countries. Um, and NATO was obviously designed kind of as a counter to that. I mean, it pretty much already existed in principle because of the World War II and all that, both World Wars. And our strong alliances that we had really had with UK, France, and Germany. Um, so it was really a counter to the Soviet Union at the time for what, 50 years, I think, something like that. The Soviet Union fell in 1991. Okay? 1991. So you really got to ask yourself, what's the purpose of NATO anymore? I think when Putin talked about the need for cooperation on security. So in that regard, I see that, but I think when we look at World War One and World War Two, one of the biggest contributors to that was a system of alliances alongside militarism, nationalism, um, imperialism, and some type of trigger event, whether it be an assassination of some archduke or going into Poland, basically. Um, you have to really ask yourself now in this current era. Number one, there's first of all there's each country is supposed to contribute 2% of their GDP, but we've been footing the bill a crap ton for years. It was actually something Donald Trump was really adamant about. Like, you pay your fair share or we're leaving. And some of these countries have started to a little bit. I know there was an interview, I believe it was the Norwegian Prime Minister or something. He was kind of saying, Trump had a point about NATO needing to, us countries needing to foot the bill a little bit more. 2% of your GDP ain't a lot, but we're footing so much there. It's just like at some point it's like what are we getting out of this? Um, this whole neoliberal dictator kind of regime change war. It's just there's they never have the end strategy in sight. Um, you look at places like Iraq, you look at Afghanistan, you look at Libya. Um, you know, Iraq, we took out Saddam Hussein. Terrorism, power vacuum, ISIS, rise of them, terrorism, boom, 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 boom. Afghanistan, we fight the Taliban for 20 freaking years, basically since I've been alive, and we can't even. I mean, they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires because the Soviets when they tried to take over Afghanistan, they spent a lot of money and resources there, and they couldn't take it. And some would say that was a contributing factor, actually, in the fall of the Soviet Union, was just the amount of resources they spent trying to take Afghanistan, which is a very rugged, mountainous type of region that's very, very difficult to capture because of that. Just the geography of that land. It's a landlocked country. Obviously, it has very valuable resources, oil, probably being the biggest one. Um, but these regime change wars need to stop. This is just another regime change war, honestly. It's proxy war right now. More old school, kind of a lot of what we did during the Cold War. We fund one side, they fund the other, that type of thing. Playing chess, basically. Um, so we're just throwing money at this war, and I mean, we pushed the Russians back in the initial advance. But what's interesting is now we're kind of stuck in those same regions. Donetsk, I think it's called. I don't. Is it Lushansk? I don't know how to pronounce it. Oh, Donbass. Yeah. So yeah, the Donbass region and then Crimea. Obviously, we're kind of in that eastern area right now, kind of stuck in basically a stalemate. Um, and we think that throwing money at the problem is going to make us take it faster. Um, What happened to making do with what you have, Mr. Zelensky? First of all, if you can't, if the $72 billion that we've sent you isn't enough to repel invaders, then I'm very concerned that you can't even win this war. That taking a peace deal at this point and letting Russia honestly have some of those territories or having some type of UN backed vote for those regions might be in your best interest at this point. Like I said, I did not know about this part at the end here where Zelensky refused to talk to the separatist leaders. I just learned that today actually. We've kind of already known that Vladimir. So Vladimir was kind of right. We did pull Zelensky back out of some of these peace deals, but I think that big one with not wanting to cooperate with those Russian separatists really backfired. This idea of we don't negotiate with terrorists type of thing. Um, it's a common thread I'm seeing among American foreign policy. That we just have to keep spending, spend, 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 kill, 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 like that, and we think we're gonna topple a dictator, and there's gonna be no consequences. All right, we're done. See ya. Bye. Mission accomplished. And your country's gone to shit. And like, sorry, excuse my language, but your country's gone to shit, and we just keep doing that. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again. Um, it's costing us as taxpayers, first of all. We have our border wide open. Who's to say, with our current conflict with Hamas, radical Islamic terrorists don't start flooding in that border? They probably already have, honestly. We should be very concerned about another terrorist attack in the next 2 or 3 months, honestly. It does not surprise me. The amount of vitriol people have against that war in Gaza right now, like, first of all, is just it's killing Biden's approval a lot. They are severely fumbling the bag among Muslim voters in particular. I know people in Dearborn are saying, we'll vote for third party or we won't vote at all. Or they might go to Trump. I mean, I know in the past he's been more embracive of Israel somewhat, but he's recently come out against Habibi, um, who doesn't want that type of two-state solution anymore. He's the first Israeli prime minister to say that. So we're defending people who don't want peace. How does that end? We're defending people who have sabotaged the peace process, who aren't even open to having a dialogue, who want to negotiate with terrorists, this, that, and the other. I know that, negotiations fall through, and I understand that people renege on stuff. It's not an excuse. Let me be very clear, and I know Hamas isn't. Which, another thing about Hamas, we sent them weapons way too dang soon. Okay, we gave them their Palestinian state in like the like early 2000s, late 90s, I believe. I think 2000, I think, was the Oslo Accords or somewhere time around there. Like, and then the Obama administration decided, let's send them weapons. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's send them weapons. Let's send the weapons to these people who just tried to kill us like 2 seconds ago. Let's send radical jihadis in Afghanistan weapons who then turned them against us. Um, it's a problem. Our foreign policy needs to change. It needs to be more focused. It needs to be I always have to use the military is my biggest issue with our foreign policy. And there's other ways. There's economic things. We have the might of the US dollar. China's using their money. They're investing in Africa. They're investing in these other countries a lot. They're investing in our own country. They would rather just build. They just want the economy to go. They just want to do that. Um and my face look good? My face look good? Okay, I think we're good. All right. So we were talking about, I know, the Putin interview. Um, so I feel like I covered a lot of the foreign policy, very geopolitical focused stuff. I guess just the final thing was, I know Tucker Carlson asked him very bravely to free a journalist. And Putin basically said, let the process play out, but sounded pretty receptive, I would say, to doing it. He sounded like he was willing to get that moving. He just didn't want it to be in the public sphere, which I get. They're delicate matters, but so Tucker did more than our current president probably to free a prisoner. So yeah. All right. So overall, just looking at this with Putin, um, and everything, it just now we have to come to this, and this is Kamala Harris slams claims of Biden's failing mental acuity and classified documents report as inaccurate and inappropriate. Okay, so as you know, Biden's kind of been in his own document scandal after calling Trump this, that, and the other. Basically, he was being investigated by a special counsel. I don't know if Trump appointed the special, or I think he was appointed after, but to investigate this matter. Um, and they found that Biden will. Let me look it up. The Special Counsel report. We can read it aloud if I can find it. They're calling it politically motivated. Okay, it's from her. That's the name of the special counsel. Enclosed, please find a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declinations decisions I have reached as by 28 CFR 608C, as we previously discussed at the request of the White House counsel and personal counsel. All right. So I didn't find the exact thing I was looking for yet, but what is very interesting, in Mr. Biden's interview with our office, he explained that he took his notebook with him after his vice presidency because they are mined, and explained that every president before me has done the exact same thing. He also specifically referenced President Reagan, who after leaving office kept handwritten diaries containing classified information at his private home, as discussed in Chapter 10. In later written answers, Mr. Biden wrote that, like presidents and vice presidents before me, I understand these notes to be my personal property. He declined to answer several questions about whether he believed his notes contained classified information, whether he believed yada yada yada, and whether he. Okay, so he didn't answer those questions, but I just find that fascinating because if Trump did something like, I mean, he had documents. I don't know if there was handwritten notes. I know there was a handwritten letter to Kim Jong Un or something that he kept or something. So that alone, how is this not like resistance or whatever? I don't know. It's all just BS. Anyway, let me continue. During Mr. regularly wrote notes in his handbooks, yada yada yada. So he was taking a lot of notes for his I'm trying to find the part of the report that talks about his mental acuity. Let me just look for it. Okay, here's what it says, AP News. A special counsel report released Thursday found evidence that President Joe Biden willfully and retain and share classified information when he was a private citizen, including about foreign policy, but concluded that were not warranted. But it's Biden's assessment of his handling. Okay, because it was talked about basically that he couldn't remember anything, was basically what it said. Willfully held on to shared with a ghostwriter that especially much of his report too. So there was a lot of writings. I did not share classified information. Portrayal of him. Yeah. So basically, it was talking about his memory. Not being able to recall. I believe when his son Beau died and when he was vice president. I'm just trying to find the page that has. Okay, sorry y'all. Okay, so in his interview with our office, Mr. Biden's memory was worse. As the first, just like what, 10-word sentence, he did not remember when he was vice president. Forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended. If it was 2013, when did I stop being vice president? Wait, 2013. Dude, Obama still had like till 2017. Like till January 7 of 2017. So you're 4 years off already. You don't remember when you were vice president. Okay, he did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died, and his memory appeared hazy when describing the Afghanistan debate that was once so important to him. Among other things, he mistakenly said he had a real difference of opinion with General Earl Eikenberry, when in fact Eikenberry was an ally whom Mr. Biden cited approvingly in his Thanksgiving memo to President Obama. In a case where the government must prove that Mr. Biden knew he had possession of the classified documents after the vice presidency and chose to keep those documents knowing he was violating law, we expect that at trial his would emphasize these limitations in his recall. We also expect many jurors to be struck by the place where the Afghanistan documents were ultimately found in Biden's Delaware home in a badly damaged box in a car near a collapsed dog crate, a dog bed, a Zappo box, yada yada. Um, but no, like a reasonable juror could not conclude this is not where a personally intentionally stores, where he's supposed to consider important classified documents critical to his legacy. Has forgotten about or is unaware of. We have considered and investigated. So Biden's just inability to remember where he was. Okay, I just wanted to read that aloud to you. Um, this guy has control of the nuclear codes. So there's that. And we just spoke about Vladimir Putin, who was able to recite 900 years of Russian history, 900 years in a single interview in a single hour. Um, Most scholars say he acted with a bad purpose. Reasonable jurors conclude discovered the Afghanistan documents in his Virginia home and then forgot about them almost immediately. So, like I said, one of the big things is they think he didn't mean to do it, and his memory is bad. As the two reasons they won't indict him on this. Um, so I will say, with Trump's case, it's a lot different. I know there was some talks of him being resistant to some of that, but just the fact that Biden can't remember when he was vice president is concerning. You got Democrats on damage control. I mean, what's his approval rating? Have we got those numbers yet? Have we got those approval rating numbers? Let's go take a look. See. So Trump's leading first of all in some of these polls. Look at that. These recent ones right here. He leads by 8 points in this one right here. That's crazy. It leads by one right here. It leads by one. It leads by 5. Um, general. Oh, and then for Massachusetts. Okay, we got that. North Carolina, Trump's leading. Okay, but let's go see. He's at 38.5. He's at the one of the lowest points of his presidency right now. Um, just to put it in perspective, Trump was basically hovering at maybe the low 40s. A couple points higher. They actually show it right here. Trump at the same point in his presidency was actually higher in approval rating, and actually even with a 42% approval rating, still lost re-election. Um, but if you can't remember when you were vice president, like we need to take a step back here because you're in charge of literally the free world, basically, and you can't even remember when you were previously vice president. That it was when it was during your tenure. What did Obama mean nothing to you? If I was Obama, I'd be offended by that. By the way, you don't remember when you were my vice president? Are you kidding me? I gave you a second chance in politics. I could have went with Hillary as my VP. We probably almost had that too. By the way, no, I could have had Hillary as my VP. Type of thing. Um, it's probably very emotional for Obama to have his own former vice president not remember he was vice president. And just the damage control. No amount of damage control is gonna you can get you out of that. And then people were in the comments, oh, people forget random things. Okay, yeah, but you don't forget when your son died and when you were vice president. Those are two things you don't forget ever. No normal person forgets that stuff. If it was a name or something or, whatever, fine, here and there, whatever, I don't care. But when you can't remember when you were the vice president for 8 freaking years, like, that's crazy. That's some, levels of incompetence I've never seen before. Um, to unanimously convict Biden. Let's just see if there's any other interesting. Willfully retained the Thanksgiving memo. So they think it was by accident, which in some respects maybe it was. That Biden kept his notebooks. Okay, so he did keep notebooks. His arguments were very interesting. Trump got a letter from Kim Jong Un directed to him. I think he should be able to keep that if we're going by that standard. However, presidents even have more broad authority. Let's look up the Presidential Records Act. Actually, we're gonna do that right now. Because I think we need to see the authority that they have. Okay. In 1978, Congress passed the Presidential Records Act, which states that any records created or received by the president as part of his constitutional, statutory, or ceremonial duties are the property of the United States government and will be managed by NARA at the end of his administration. The Presidential Records Act changed the legal status of presidential and vice presidential materials. Under the PRA, the official records of the president and his staff are owned by the United States, not by the president. The archivist is required to take custody of these records when the president leaves office and maintain them in a federal depository. These records are eligible for under FOIA 5 years after the president leaves office. Then why don't we know stuff about the JFK assassination? The president may restrict access to kinds of information for up to 12 years after he leaves office, but then records are reviewed for FOIA exemptions only. Took effect in 1981, and the records they were the first to be administered under this law. Under the FOIA can be found under the following links, so they're each under their respective libraries. Actually, they don't have the Obama one there yet. I thought they're building. Oh, right here. When the president left office, in accordance with the 30 million pages of unclassified records to NARA facility in the Chicago area. Yeah, so he brought it closer to his hometown in Chicago. Makes sense. Where's the Donald J. Trump library? Where is that? They don't got his library here. Oh, they salty. Where's his archives? Um, okay. So, the PR change changed the legal ownership of the official records of the president from the private to public and established a new statutory structure under which presidents may review records of their administrations. Establishes public ownership of all presidential records and defines them term presidential records. And requires the vice presidential records be treated the same way as presidential records. Places the responsibility of the custody and management of incumbent presidential records with the president. Requires the president and the staff take all practical steps to file personal records separately from presidential records. So, I don't know what the file. First, that's annoying. You gotta file all that. That's kind of annoying. Allows the incumbent president to dispose of records that no longer have administrative, historical, informational, or evidentiary value once the views of the archivist of the United States on the proposed disposal have been obtained in writing. Establishes in law that any incumbent presidential records, whether textual or electronic, held on courtesy storage by the archivist remain in the exclusive legal custody of the president, and that any request to access such records must be made to the president, not NARA. So any incumbent presidential records are held in a courtesy storage. Such the presidential records automatically transfer to the legal custody of the archivist as soon as the president leaves office. Establishes a process by which the president may restrict and the public may obtain access to the records after the president leaves office. Specifically, PRA allows for public access to presidential records through the Freedom of Information Act beginning 5 years after the end of the administration, but allows the president to invoke as many as 6 specific restrictions to public actions for up to 12 years. Codifies the process by which former and incumbent presidents conduct reviews for executive privilege prior to public release of the records by NARA, which have formerly been governed by Executive Order 13489. Establishes procedures for Congress, courts, and subsequent administrations to obtain special access to records from NARA that remain closed to the public, following a privileged review period by the former and incumbent presidents. The procedures governing such special access requests continue to be governed by the relevant provisions of Executive Order 13489. Establishes a preservation requirement for official business conducted using non-official electronic messaging accounts. Any individual creating that you have to keep all your tweets, dude. You gotta keep all your DMs. That's crazy to think about. Oh dear lord, they probably got some embarrassing stuff, especially Bill Clinton, I'm sure, Mr. Okay, anyway, establishes preservation requirements. Any individual creating presidential records must not use non-official electronic messaging accounts unless the individual copies an official account as the message is created or forwards a complete copy of the record to an official messaging account is familiar with it. Oh my god. I'm losing my voice doing all this talking today. Prevents an individual who has been convicted of a crime related to the review, retention, removal, or destruction of records from being given access to any original records. Now I see why they want to indict Trump. They want a conviction here. Because if they get a conviction on Trump, even if he becomes president, he can't expose them. So you better hope that, he gets some of this stuff cleared soon, honestly. That's very interesting, actually. I did not know that. You know, so if he's convicted, he won't be able to, like I said, go to these any. It says the word any original records. But let's look up Executive Order 13489 because I'm also interested in that. um. Oh, this is from. Oh, this is okay. This is from 2009 from the Obama administration. By the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, and in order to establish policies and procedures governing the assertion of executive privilege by incumbent and former presidents in connection with the release of presidential records by the National Archives and Records Administration (NARA), pursuant to the Presidential Records Act of 1978, it is hereby ordered as followed. For purposes of this order, archivist refers to the archivist of the whereas designee NARA refers to the National Archives Records Administration. Presidential Records Act refers to their Presidential Records Act 44 U.S.C. 2201 to 2207. NARA regulations refers to the NARA regulations implementing the Presidential Records Act 36 CFR Part 1270. Okay, we don't need to read all this. Okay. Okay. These are all the different provisions. NARA refers. Okay. A final court order is a court order from which no appeal may be taken. A substantial question of exists if narrow disclosure might impair national security, law enforcement, deliberate process of the executive branch. Okay, when the archivist provides notice to the incumbent and former presidents of his intent to disclose presidential records pursuant to Section 170.46 of the NARA regulations, the archivist, using any guidelines provided by the incumbent and former presidents, shall identify any specific materials, the disclosure of which he believes may raise a substantial question of executive privilege. However, nothing in this order is intended to affect the right of the incumbent or former presidents to invoke executive privilege with respect to materials not identified by the archivist. Copies of the notice for the incumbent president shall be delivered to the president through the council of the president and the attorney general. Okay. Upon the passage of 30 days after the receipt by the incumbent and former presidents of a notice to disclose presidential records, the archivist may disclose the records covered by the notice unless during that time period the archivist has received a claim of executive privilege by the incumbent or former president of the archivist, has been instructed by the incumbent president or his designee to extend the time period for a certain and with reason for the extension in the notice. The shorter the time period, okay. If the president does not invoke executive privilege, the council of the president shall notify the former president, the archivist, the attorney general in writing. Okay, this is boring. So basically, it's just a bunch of clarification, it seems like. Anyway, I'm gonna cut the video here. We have an incompetent president, and we're up against Russia, is what I want you to take from all this. We're up against Vladimir Putin, who was able to recite 900 years of history. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Watch my gaming content too. Have a great day.